The first settlement of present-day Croatia dates back to the Paleolithic age. Archaeological findings prove that humans started living in this region around 100,000 years ago. Of particular importance is the Krapina region in northern Croatia, where remains of Neanderthal humans have been discovered, one of the oldest and most important examples of their kind in Europe. These early hunter-gatherers lived in caves and moved along rivers and coastlines where they found abundant food. Over thousands of years, settlement developed further. During the Neolithic period, the first settled communities emerged, who began to grow crops and keep animals, and stone tools, ceramic vessels, and settlement traces provide evidence of continuous cultural change. Numerous remains of these early cultures have been found, especially on the Adriatic coast and offshore islands, suggesting that the Mediterranean region played an important role in trade and cultural exchange at that time. Illyrian tribes from the 8th century BC. Illyrian tribes settled in much of what is now Croatia, forming numerous tribes with their own rulers, customs, and dialects. They settled both inland and along the Adriatic coast and had a decisive influence on the region for centuries. The Illyrians developed an independent culture reflected in their burial rites, ceramics, weapons, and architecture, among other things, and numerous burial mounds, tumuli, and fortified settlements testify to their way of life. Their main livelihoods were agriculture, animal husbandry, mining, and trade, especially with the Greeks and Etruscans. Coastal tribes such as the Liburnians were also known for their excellent seafaring skills and played an important role in regional trade in the Adriatic. Although the Illyrians never formed a unified state, they were culturally united and, like the Greeks and later the Romans, resisted and adapted to outside influences. Their cultural traces can still be seen in Croatia today and represent an important chapter in the country's early history. Greek colonies. From the 4th century BC, Greek sailors and merchants began to establish trading colonies along the eastern Adriatic coast, primarily for economic reasons and to trade with Illyrian tribes in the interior. One of the most important Greek settlements was Isa, today Vis, an island founded by Greeks from the Syracuse polis. These Greek colonies not only brought new trade goods to the region such as wine, olive oil, and ceramics, but also important cultural influences. The Greeks introduced their architecture, writing, religion, and urban organization. They built temples, public squares, and modeled buildings after their own cities. The presence of the Greeks had a great impact on the indigenous Illyrian tribes, who adopted or mixed with many cultural elements, and due to the exchange of rain, a culturally diverse environment developed, especially on the coast. The Greek colonies thus laid an important foundation for the later development of Croatia and prepared the region for contact with other great powers, especially the Roman Empire. In the early 1st century BC, the territory of present-day Croatia gradually became part of the Roman Empire, and the Romans organized several military campaigns to establish control over the region inhabited by Illyrian tribes. After successfully subjugating the region, they incorporated it into the provinces of Illyricum, then Pannonia in the north and Dalmatia in the south. Croatia thus became part of one of the most powerful ancient civilizations and benefited greatly from its progress and organization, undergoing a phase of intense urbanization and economic development under Roman rule. Important cities emerged, such as Pula, with one of the best preserved Roman amphitheaters in the world, and Split, where Emperor Diocletian built his famous palace in the late 3rd century AD, a monumental structure that still forms the heart of the city today. Salona, today Solun, was also the capital of the Roman province of Dalmatia and became an important religious, political, and economic center with a population of up to 60,000. A network of roads, aqueducts, and harbors was built, which significantly improved trade, communication, and the supply of cities. The local population gradually became Romanized, adopting the Latin language, Roman law, and elements of the Roman way of life, architecture, and religion, and Rome's influence was felt in almost every aspect of life. Education, architecture, art, religion, and agriculture were deeply affected. With the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the new religion also spread in Croatia, initially secretly, then openly, with the establishment of churches and bishoprics, especially in towns like Salona. And although the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century AD, many Roman buildings, cultural elements, and urban centers remained. The Roman period left a profound cultural and material legacy that still visibly characterizes the country today. Numerous archaeological cities, ruins, and museums testify to the importance of this period for the history of Croatia. The settlement of Croats. In the 7th century, the settlement of Slavs, including Croats, began in the Balkans. This migration was part of a larger Slavic migration that affected the entire region of southeastern Europe. The exact origin of the Croats is still the subject of scholarly debate today, but it is generally assumed that they came from the north of the Carpathians, probably from the area between the Oder and the Vistula, and arrived during a period of great political turmoil and social change, when the Byzantine Empire and the Lombard Empire in Italy had an impact on the region. The Slavs settled in various parts of present-day Croatia, especially on the Adriatic coast, in the neighboring mountains and inland. The settlement usually took place in several waves and with different tribes that would later become the ancestors of modern Croats. This first phase of Croatian settlement was characterized by the formation of local tribal communities that often came into conflict with the existing Byzantine and Lombard rulers. However, Croats formed their own identity and began to develop their own political structure, which resulted in the emergence of small principalities and later larger political entities. A notable aspect of Slavic settlement was the adoption of Christianity spread by Byzantine missionaries, especially Saints Cyril and Methodius, and Christianization contributed to the Slavs becoming increasingly integrated into the European cultural fabric. Already in the 9th century, the first Croatian princes began to place themselves under the influence of the Frankish Empire and to develop closer relations with Western powers, which in the long run formed the basis of the Croatian nation. The settlement of the Croats not only ethnically and culturally transformed the region, but also brought about decisive social and political changes that later influenced the development of the medieval Kingdom of Croatia, a process of Slavic settlement and integration into the existing political and religious system that laid the foundation for the later emergence of the Croatian kingdom and the country's subsequent history. In 925, the first Croatian kingdom was established under the leadership of King Tomislav. Tomislav, who had previously served as the prince of the former Croatian principality, united various Croatian tribes and regions under his rule, and with his military and political power, he was crowned the first king of Croatia. King Tomislav played an important role in unifying the Croatian lands, which at the time consisted of various, largely autonomous principalities. Thanks to his diplomatic and military skills, he was able to unite these disparate regions and establish a centralized state. Tomislav was not only recognized as king, but was also able to integrate religious institutions into the newly established kingdom, which helped consolidate Croatian identity. The coronation and the establishment of the Kingdom of Croatia took place in an unstable political environment, with conflicts with neighboring empires, mainly the Byzantines and Hungarians. Tomislav successfully defended the independence of his empire and ensured that Croatia could exist as a politically independent entity. Under his leadership, Croatia experienced a period of relative stability and expansion, with the kingdom's borders extending to parts of modern-day Bosnia and Herzegovina, and during his reign, Tomislav also managed to strengthen the religious and cultural foundations of the Kingdom of Croatia. He secured the support of the Roman Church and helped establish Christianity as a central part of Croatian identity. This religious connection with Rome not only contributed to Croatia's integration into the European Christian network, but also strengthened the country's political position in the region. Tomislav is considered one of the most important figures in early Croatian history. Although his reign laid the foundations for Croatia's political and cultural development in the Middle Ages, the kingdom experienced a period of instability and fragmentation after his death. However, his coronation in 925 remains a symbol of the first Croatian state and an important milestone on the road to the later development of modern Croatia. Personal union with Hungary. After the death of the last Croatian king, Koloman, in 1102, Croatia entered into a personal union with the Kingdom of Hungary. This union took place with the election of Koloman's son, Ladislaus II, as King of Croatia, and although the treaty sealing the personal union allowed Croatia to largely retain its own identity and institutions, the country was politically tied to Hungary, which had a decisive influence on Croatia's future history. The personal union between Croatia and Hungary was primarily political and dynastic in nature. This meant that both kingdoms had the same monarch, but remained separate entities with their own laws and institutions, and the Croats retained their own crown and self-government, which provided a certain political autonomy. However, Hungary had the upper hand in foreign policy matters, and together with Croatia defended the borders of the kingdom against external threats, especially the expansion of the Byzantine Empire and the Ottomans. This union brought Croatia a number of advantages. On the one hand, it stabilized the country, which at the time was facing internal conflicts and external threats. Secondly, it gave Croatia a certain security and protection under the powerful Kingdom of Hungary, but it did not completely renounce Croatia's independence. Croatian nobles retained their rights to a large extent, and the country was able to preserve its existing institutions and cultural identity. Despite the autonomy Croatia enjoyed within the personal union, unification with Hungary brought difficulties. Croatia was now involved in the political and military conflicts of the Hungarian Empire, which could lead to tensions with neighboring countries, especially the Byzantine Empire. Differences in administration and legislation between the two kingdoms also repeatedly led to conflicts, and for centuries Croatia was formally subordinated to the Hungarian crown and benefited in many ways from this union, which lasted until the 16th century, even if Croatian autonomy was repeatedly questioned. The personal union with Hungary was an important event in Croatia's medieval history, as it linked the country politically and culturally to the Central and Eastern European region and laid the foundations for the development of a common history with Hungary and other neighboring peoples. The Ottoman threat. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Ottoman expansion began in Europe, and Croatia was one of the first regions to be directly affected by this threat. As the Ottoman Empire moved further westward, much of the Balkans came under Ottoman rule, and Croatia came under increasing pressure. In the 15th century, the Ottomans began to conquer parts of southern Croatia, especially the coastal region and the interior, and among the first cities conquered were important towns such as Knin and parts of Dalmatia. The fortress of Osnabrück in 1522 and the siege of Rijeka in 1996 are just two of the many military conflicts that document the Ottoman Empire's advance into Croatia. This expansion meant a dramatic change for the Croatian population, both in terms of political allegiance and daily life, and a striking event during this period was the conquest of Zagreb by the Ottomans in 1592, although the city was never fully controlled, only temporarily occupied. Ottoman rule led to drastic changes in many parts of Croatia. In the conquered areas, the Ottomans adopted the Islamic religion and Ottoman rule, and there was a large-scale resettlement of the population, as Croats fleeing Ottoman territory sought refuge in the northwestern and western parts of the kingdom, especially in mountainous countries such as present-day Slovenia and Austria. The Ottoman Empire also carried out large-scale land redistributions. Peasants and nobles under Ottoman rule had to adapt to new systems of taxation and land ownership, and Islam spread throughout the conquered lands, leading to significant population displacement and cultural and religious mixing. Many Croats were forced to convert to Islam, while others fled as refugees to unconquered parts of Europe. Overall, the Ottoman threat led not only to physical and political changes in Croatia, but also to cultural shifts and population reorganization, which still had far-reaching consequences in the 17th century. Despite the enormous challenges of Ottoman rule, many parts of Croatia managed to preserve their cultural identity, especially in the west and in the mountainous regions that were never fully ruled by the Ottomans. Habsburg rule from 1527, Croatia came under Habsburg protection, marking the beginning of a long period of Habsburg rule. This decision was influenced by the growing threat of the Ottoman Empire, which was advancing further and further westward and had conquered large parts of the Balkans. During this period, the Ottomans were particularly strong in the south and east of Croatia, while the rest of the country lived in constant war and uncertainty. Following the defeat of the Croatian nobility at the hands of the Ottomans and the destruction of much of the country in the preceding decades, the representatives of Croatia sought a stronger protective power, and in 1527 the Croatian Assembly took a decisive step by electing Ferdinand of Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, as King of Croatia. The aim of this step was not only to provide protection against the Ottomans, but also to establish closer political and military ties with the Habsburg Empire. With the accession of Croatia to the Habsburg monarchy, the country entered an important phase in its history. The Habsburgs, who also provided the kings of Hungary and later the Austrian Empire, began to stabilize the country militarily and to form a common front against the Ottomans. Although the Habsburg Empire was not in a position to immediately retake the entire country from the Ottomans, the introduction of the monarchy meant for Croatia a certain political security and the beginning of long-term loyalty to the Habsburg Empire. The Habsburgs had a strong military influence in the region, especially in the fight against the Ottomans, which led to a long-term stability in the western and northern parts of Croatia, and the country itself became part of the crown territory of the Habsburg Empire, officially functioning as the Kingdom of Croatia-Hungary. However, Croatia remained dependent on the Habsburgs in terms of its political structure, which restricted Croatian autonomy and freedom of choice. In return, the Croats were granted a certain degree of autonomy and gained the support of the Habsburg Empire in the fight against external threats. An important aspect of this Habsburg rule was the promotion of infrastructure projects and the consolidation of the Catholic faith in the country. As the Catholic Church and the nobility gained more and more influence under Habsburg rule, Croatia underwent extensive reconstruction as part of this development. However, the Habsburgs also relied on their military presence and sought to modernize the country within the framework of the empire. In addition to military and political changes, Habsburg rule also led to greater economic integration of Croatia into the empire as a whole. There were new trade relations and infrastructure projects that increasingly integrated Croatia into the economic networks of the Habsburg Empire. The country benefited from the trade routes and the stability offered by the Habsburg Empire in the central and western parts of Europe. Illyrian provinces. During the Napoleonic Wars, Croatia experienced a significant geopolitical shift. In 1809, following Napoleon's victory over the Habsburgs in the War of the Fifth Coalition, part of present-day Croatia was incorporated into the Napoleonic Empire as part of the French Illyrian provinces. This reorganization was part of the French expansion in Europe, aimed at gaining control of strategic territories and unifying the region between Italy and the Balkans. The Illyrian provinces, which existed from 1809 to 1813, included not only present-day Croatia, but also most of the Adriatic coast, present-day Slovenia, and western Serbia. For Croatia, this meant a far-reaching reorganization of its administrative and political structures. The region came under direct French control, losing its traditional link with the Habsburg Empire and coming under the French administrative and legal system. And Croatia, as part of the Illyrian provinces, also came under direct French rule in connection with numerous reforms carried out by Napoleonic France. During this period, many of the regional and local structures of the previous Habsburg rule were replaced by French administrative reforms. Napoleon sought to centralize and unify the region, focusing on creating an efficient and modern administration. These changes included the introduction of new legal norms, tax systems, and a centralized bureaucracy. The promotion of French language and culture was also part of Napoleonic reforms. The Illyrian provinces were also intended to serve as a strategic buffer against the Habsburg Empire and British and Russian influences, as these powers sought to push back Napoleon and his expanding territories. And at this stage, Croatia witnessed an increased military presence of French troops as Napoleon sought to consolidate his hold on the region. However, this period of French control in Croatia did not last long. After Napoleon's defeat and the Congress of Vienna in 1915, the territory of the Illyrian provinces was returned to the Habsburg Empire, and Croatia returned to Habsburg control. This return had a profound impact on Croatia, as most of the Napoleonic reforms in the region were preserved to some extent, but the political structure was again more strongly determined by the Habsburg monarchy. As a result, it lost its traditional ties with the Habsburg Empire and came under the French administrative and legal system. Austro-Hungarian monarchy. From 1867 to 1918, Croatia was part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, a dual monarchy consisting of the Austrian and Hungarian empires. This period was a decisive turning point in Croatian history, as after centuries of Habsburg control and various political and territorial changes, Croatia was now integrated into a new form of state organization. In 1867, the Austro-Hungarian monarchy was reformed as a result of the compromise signed between Austria and Hungary, which led to the reorganization of the Habsburg Empire. The 1867 treaty created the dual system, which provided for both an Austrian and a Hungarian crown. This had a profound impact on Croatia, as it was now subject to the Hungarian part of the monarchy, while officially remaining part of the Habsburg monarchy, and the decision to assign Croatia to the Hungarian part of the empire further complicated the Croatian political landscape. Croatia still had a certain autonomy, but it was limited under the rule of the Hungarian royal family and the Hungarian government. Hungarian influence in Croatia was strong, and Croats had to deal with Hungarian politics and the challenges that came with it during this period, and Croatia experienced various reforms and developments under Austro-Hungarian rule. Croatia continued to be self-governing to a certain extent, but the growing Hungarian dominance led to tensions. The Hungarians sought to further strengthen their control over the Croatian administration and economy, which led to conflicts with the Croatian elites and population, while the Austrian side encouraged economic modernization and supported Croatian cultural and educational initiatives. Another important aspect of this period was political unrest in Croatia, fueled by growing national consciousness. There was a growing demand for greater autonomy and a stronger Croatian identity within the dual monarchy, which was reflected in the promotion of Croatian language, culture, and political independence, and led to the establishment of various political parties advocating for the protection of Croatian interests and cultural independence. Despite efforts to preserve Croatian autonomy, Croatia remained dependent on Hungarian politics on many political and economic issues during the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Tensions between the Croatian and Hungarian governments led to conflicts that characterized the political landscape in Croatia before the First World War, World War I, and the collapse of the monarchy. After the First World War, which lasted from 1914 to 1918, Europe experienced deep political and territorial turmoil. The war led to the collapse of several European empires, including the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which ceased to exist as a dual monarchy at the end of the war. This disintegration had a significant impact on the South Slavic peoples, including the Croats, who had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire since 1867 and enjoyed a certain autonomy within the empire under the Hungarian crown. During the war and the increasing defeats of the Central Powers, the political situation in Croatia and the entire monarchy became increasingly unstable. Following the end of the war in 1918 and the final collapse of the monarchy, the South Slavic peoples faced an important decision about their future, and Croatia, which played an important role in the South Slavic movement at the time, sought greater political self-determination. In the face of the dissolution of Austria-Hungary and the emergence of new nation-states in Central and Eastern Europe, Croatian political forces sought unification with other South Slavic peoples. These peoples, grouped as Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, were already seeking increased cooperation in the years before the war, and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes was renamed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in 1929 in order to better unite the various South Slavic peoples and overcome national tensions. The renaming was an attempt to create a more cohesive nation-state entity that would integrate the different ethnic and cultural groups in the new kingdom. But this change was only the first step in a long process accompanied by numerous tensions and political conflicts, and despite the renaming and the formal establishment of a unified state, the kingdom continued to be characterized by tensions between different ethnic groups from the very beginning. Croats in particular felt disadvantaged by Serbian dominance in the political system. The Serbian royal family and the Serbian elite had great influence over the central government in Belgrade, and this was met with resistance from Croats, who wanted greater autonomy and equal rights. The Croatian People's Party, the most powerful political force among Croats, wanted more self-government for Croatia, which did not find much acceptance in Yugoslavia's centralist orientation, especially after King Alexander I's authoritarian reshaping of Yugoslavia's political system in 1929, dissolving parliament, and ruling by dictatorship and censorship. Resistance to Serbian domination increased. These political changes intensified the sense of isolation and oppression in Croatia. In 1939, after years of repression, an important turning point occurred when the Cvetković-Maček Agreement was signed, which led to the creation of Banat Croatia, an autonomous region within Yugoslavia that granted Croatia some political rights and a degree of self-government. This measure was a concession to Croatian aspirations for autonomy, but it did not permanently calm political tensions within Yugoslavia. Croatian dissatisfaction and growing political unrest were exacerbated by rising international tensions in the late 1930s. The rise of fascist movements in Europe and the expansion of National Socialist Germany created an unstable geopolitical situation. This led to increased ethnic polarization and political instability in Yugoslavia. During the Second World War, Croatia became an independent state in 1941 under the fascist Ustasha movement, and the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was quickly crushed after Nazi Germany invaded Yugoslavia in April 1941. As a result, the independent Croatian state of Nezavisna Država Hrvatska, NDH, was established as a puppet state under the control of the Axis powers, particularly Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Ustasha, an ultranationalist and fascist Croatian organization, seized power under the leadership of Ante Pavelić, a movement formed in the 1930s from exile groups in Italy and Hungary that sought to create an independent, ethnically homogeneous Croatia. It sought to unify the territory of Croatia under its control, as well as part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which it also claimed. The Ustasha government, supported by German and Italian leaders, immediately began to implement a series of brutal measures to create an ethnically pure Croatia, including the forced deportation and murder of Serbs, Jews, and Roma. Particularly horrifying was the establishment of concentration camps, including the infamous Jasenovac camp, where thousands of people were systematically murdered. It is estimated that between 200,000 and 350,000 Serbs, as well as thousands of Jews, Roma, and political opponents, died in the areas controlled by Ustasha forces during the Ustasha rule. The brutality of the Ustasha government was met with fierce resistance, both by Serbs living in Ustasha-controlled areas and by communist partisans who formed a strong resistance movement under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito. The partisans, composed not only of Croats, but also of Serbs, Slovenes, and other South Slavic peoples, fought against both Ustasha and the occupying Axis forces. The Ustasha rule was therefore characterized by constant conflicts, and the armed conflicts led to considerable loss of life and destruction, while at the same time the German Empire, seeing the NDH as a strategic ally, began to expand its control over the country more and more. From 1943 onwards, the Italian presence in Croatia was replaced by Italian surrender, which further destabilized the region. This worsened the situation of the Ustasha government, which was under pressure from resistance movements and allied forces, and with the approach of the Allies and the imminent defeat of the Axis powers in 1945, the Ustasha government began to disintegrate. The independent state of Croatia collapsed when partisans under Tito liberated the country. Ante Pavelić and other prominent Ustasha members fled Croatia as the Yugoslav partisans took control of the country, and after the end of the war, Croatia became part of Socialist Yugoslavia under Tito, which led to significant political and social reconstruction in the country. The Ustasha period remained a dark and painful period in Croatian history, characterized by massive crimes against humanity, deportations, and ethnic cleansing. It remained a sensitive topic in Croatia for many years after the war, as the political landscape and national identity were shaped by the traumatic experiences of this period. Socialist Republic within Yugoslavia. After the end of the Second World War, Croatia became part of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which was established as a socialist state under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito. The creation of this socialist federation was a decisive turning point in the history of Croatia, which was integrated into a new political order after the war and the tragic experiences of the Ustasha rule. Croatia became one of the 6 constituent republics within the new Yugoslav state and gained a degree of autonomy after the war, but was politically and economically dependent on Belgrade. The Croatian communist Tito, who played an important role as leader of the Yugoslav partisan movement during the Second World War, sought to create a federal socialist society. Ethnic tensions between the different peoples of Yugoslavia were to be mitigated through federal structures and a common socialist ideology. Under Tito, Croatia experienced a period of reconstruction and modernization, and the Yugoslav government maintained close economic and political relations with many socialist states, which led to a certain stability and significant economic growth. Croatia benefited from increased industrialization, especially in cities such as Zagreb, Split, and Rijeka, which developed into important industrial centers. The coastal region became a popular tourist destination, and the Adriatic Sea became a central part of the Yugoslav economy. But despite this progress, there were always tensions within the country. Yugoslavia was a multi-ethnic state, and ethnic conflicts never completely disappeared. In Croatia, there were always disagreements between various national and ethnic groups, and Croatian nationalists in particular and their demands for greater autonomy were often met with resistance from other parts of the country, especially from Serbs, who favored greater centralization of the state. However, these tensions were not completely eliminated by Tito's policy of trying to maintain a balance between the different peoples. Tito's government tried to integrate different nationalities and overcome their differences by placing a strong emphasis on Yugoslav identity, but this led to tensions in Croatia as many Croats felt that they were losing their cultural identity and national autonomy in favor of a centralized Yugoslav state. The issue of national identity and autonomy was therefore a recurring theme in Croatia's political landscape. With Tito's death in 1980, tensions in Yugoslavia began to rise again. The Yugoslav Federation was destabilized by the leader's illness and death, and political, social, and economic problems increased. In the 1980s, resistance to the communist system increased and there was a rise in nationalist and separatist movements in several Yugoslav republics, including Croatia. These movements grew stronger in the following years and eventually led to the political turmoil and breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. On June 1991, Croatia officially declared its independence from Yugoslavia. This decision followed political tensions within Yugoslavia that intensified in the 1980s, especially after the death of Josip Broz Tito. Croatia, which was already constantly striving for greater autonomy during the socialist period under Tito, was fed up with Serbia's dominant role in the Yugoslav Federation and wanted its own national identity and political independence. The Declaration of Independence took place in a highly polarized and uncertain political environment, with Yugoslavia in deep crisis. The Serbian leadership and Slobodan Milosevic wanted to further centralize the country and concentrate power in Belgrade, which met with resistance in Croatia and other republics such as Slovenia, as many of these regions wanted to preserve their national identity and have more control over their own affairs. Croatia felt that its cultural, political, and economic future could be better secured without Belgrade's control. The day after the Declaration of Independence, the Serbian army, supported by paramilitary units, responded with military force, especially in Croatia, where the Serbian minority, which populated most of the country, actively opposed the independence of the new Croatian state, which immediately led to an armed conflict. This conflict quickly escalated into a brutal war with both domestic and international dimensions, the so-called Croatian War of 1991-1995. In a war characterized by ethnic tensions and serious human rights violations, with many civilian casualties on both sides, Serbian forces supported pro-Serb rebels in Croatia and sought to separate larger Serb-populated areas from Croatia and integrate them into Greater Serbia. This led to heavy fighting, sieges, and ethnic cleansing, particularly in cities such as Vukovar and Dubrovnik. The international community was initially reluctant to intervene in the conflict, but eventually the majority of states recognized Croatia's independence, and the European community, later the European Union and the United Nations, played a crucial role by organizing aid and applying diplomatic pressure on Yugoslavia. In the end, the Croats managed to win their independence, although the war continued for many years. The Croatian War finally ended in 1995 with the so-called Dayton Peace Agreement for the whole of Yugoslavia and the Erdut Agreement for Croatia, which put an end to military conflicts and fully recognized the Croatian statehood. But the war had left deep scars, and the country had to deal with the consequences of ethnic conflicts and massive destruction. Nevertheless, the Declaration of Independence in 1991 is considered a symbolic act in the establishment of the modern Croatian state, and marks an important milestone on Croatia's path towards accession to Europe and the international community. The Croatian War, which lasted from 1991 to 1995, was a bloody and complex conflict that is considered part of the breakup of Yugoslavia. On June 25, 1991, the war began immediately after Croatia declared its independence, and Croatia's decision to secede from Yugoslavia was met with great resistance, especially from the Serbian population in Croatia and Serbia, which did not recognize Croatia's independence. Serbian militias, supported by the Yugoslav People's Army JNA, did everything in their power to prevent Croatia from maintaining its independence. The JNA and Serbian paramilitary units tried to control and segregate Serb-populated areas, which led to heavy fighting in various regions, especially in the disputed areas of Krajina, ethnic Serb-populated areas in southern Croatia, and towns like Vukovar, which were fought to the point of destruction. The war was characterized by fierce fighting, sieges, ethnic cleansing, and serious human rights violations on both sides. The worst atrocities occurred during the siege of towns such as Vukovar and Dubrovnik, where thousands of civilians were killed or displaced, and the siege of Vukovar by Serb forces was one of the bloodiest and most dramatic episodes of the war, with the town completely destroyed after months of fighting. Despite the military support of Serbia and the Yugoslav People's Army, Croatian forces managed to achieve military successes in the later years of the war. With the support of Western countries and the international community, which became increasingly aware of the situation, Croatian forces managed to retake many Serb-held areas, and the war ended in 1995 with Operation Storm, a large-scale offensive by Croatian forces that retook Serb-held areas in western and southern Croatia. This operation led to the flight of tens of thousands of Serbs from these areas, causing further ethnic displacement and serious humanitarian consequences. The war ended with the Erdut Accords, signed in 1995, which restored political and territorial stability in Croatia. International recognition. In 1992, Croatia finally received international recognition as a sovereign state following its declaration of independence in 1991. This was a decisive moment in the country's history and helped to further legitimize the Croatian War and increase international pressure on the warring parties. Initially, the international community, including the United Nations and the European Community, now the European Union, found it difficult to recognize Croatia as an independent state due to the war and military conflicts that shook the country in the years following the Declaration of Independence. The geopolitical situation also played a role, as Serbia and other Yugoslav republics opposed to the breakup of Yugoslavia did not recognize Croatia's independence. Despite these difficulties, the attitude of the international community changed during 1992, and the European community was the first to recognize Croatia as an independent state. This decision was officially announced on 15th January 1992, and shortly afterwards, on 22nd May 1992, Croatia joined the United Nations, which was another strong sign of its international recognition. Recognition by international organizations not only gave Croatia formal sovereignty, but also strengthened the country's position in the then increasingly important peace negotiations, and this international recognition helped put Croatia on the path to becoming a more stable state, even if the war continued for several more years. The recognition process and the international relations established during this period played a key role in supporting Croatia in the conflict, both diplomatically and humanitarian. Croatia's recognition not only marked the end of the political uncertainty surrounding the country's existence as a state, but was also an important step towards Croatia's stabilization and further integration into the international community. As a result, it lost its traditional ties with the Habsburg Empire and came under the French administrative and legal system. Croatia's formal accession to the European Union on July 1, 2013, becoming the 28th member state of the Union, marked a significant milestone in the country's history, not only integrating Croatia into the circle of European democracies, but also leading to greater economic and political cooperation with other European states. Accession to the EU was the culmination of a long process that began with Croatia's Declaration of Independence and its efforts to achieve stability, democracy, and a market economy after the end of the Croatian War. Accession to the EU brought Croatia many benefits, including access to the European single market and opportunities for trade, exchange of capital and services, as well as financial support from EU funds used for modernization of infrastructure, judiciary, and other state institutions. Accession also meant greater integration of Croatia into the Union's political, economic, and social structure, which further supported the country's development. On 1 January 2023, Croatia's accession to the Eurozone and the adoption of the euro as its currency marked another important step in Croatia's European integration, bringing the country closer to the rest of the Eurozone. The introduction of the euro facilitated trade with other Eurozone member states, simplified cross-border transactions, and strengthened Croatia's economic position within the EU. Today, Croatia is a modern country that has become more stable both economically and politically, and has become an important member of the European Union, actively participating in shaping its political and economic agenda. The country benefits from its EU member status in areas such as trade, investment, tourism, and labor mobility, while continuing to tackle problems such as unemployment, corruption, and regional imbalances. Tourism remains one of the mainstays of the Croatian economy, with millions of visitors flocking to the Adriatic coast every year to experience the country's natural beauty, historic cities, and cultural highlights. While Croatian culture has flourished and the country has established itself as a modern European Union member state, actively participating in international political and economic initiatives. To summarize, Croatia's history is a long and diverse narrative shaped by numerous cultural and political influences. Before becoming part of the Roman Empire, the region was inhabited in ancient times by various peoples, including Illyrians and Greeks, and after the collapse of the empire in the 5th century, Slavs settled in the region and established the early Croatian kingdom. In the Middle Ages, Croatia was closely linked politically with Hungary and repeatedly clashed with the Ottomans, who threatened the country in the 16th century. As part of the Habsburg Empire, Croatia fought alongside the Habsburgs against the Ottoman Empire, which characterized the country until the end of the First World War. After the war, Croatia became part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which became socialist after the Second World War. Croatia's independence was declared in 1991, which led to a bloody war that only ended with a peace agreement in 1995. Since then, Croatia has stabilized politically and economically, joined NATO, and became a member of the European Union in 2013. Today, it is a democratic state and a major tourist destination known for its stunning Adriatic coastline and historical significance.